In this tutorial we're going to be looking at a very popular cake decorating technique, and that's of piping. Now, as well as a piping bag, you're probably already aware that there are a range of different shapes and sizes of piping nozzles, and these will give you different effects. So if we look at this pink cupcake, this has been created using a star-shaped nozzle. Whereas when we look at the chocolate cupcake, you can see a difference in the piping shape, and this is because a round nozzle has been used. Now, the first thing I want to do is show you how to set up your piping bag. If you're using a disposable one like this, then you'll need to cut off the tip. Once you've put your nozzle in, you need to push it down as far as possible and then just trim away a little at a time. If you cut it too big, then obviously your nozzle is just going to fall straight through and your buttercream icing will just go everywhere. So it's best to cut off a little and then keep trimming it back until it fits and it's a nice tight snug fit. Now you'll notice here I've put the piping bag into a pint glass. This is going to really help you, especially if you're working on your own, and to make sure that you don't make excess mess. So I folded over. I'm actually only filling about half of the piping bag here. Now you can use pre-made butter icing, and I would suggest if you've not already been making butter icing at home before, it's a good way of starting, because if you don't get the consistency right, that's going to make it trickier for you to actually pipe. So if you want to start off with shop bought butter icing, that's absolutely fine. What I'm demonstrating here is creating almost like a Victoria sponge cake, but I'm using buttercream instead of fresh cream. So I'm going to start off with a layer of jam and then top it up with the buttercream that I'm going to pipe on. So you'll see that I've cut the cake in half, trying to do so as evenly as possible. You can use a bread knife to do that. You don't need to use specialist cake equipment. So I've spooned on some of the jam, and again this is just from a jar, but if you were testing and challenging yourself with your practical skills, you might even consider making your own jam. And I'm using a palette knife to spread it around. Now the reason for this is that you want as even a surface as possible for aesthetics, so that it looks better, so that the piped buttercream goes on more evenly, and so that actually improves the taste, because if you have it unevenly spread and you've got lots of jam in one end and not enough jam in another, for example, then that's not going to be a very satisfying cake to eat. So once you've got your layer of jam on first, you then pipe on your buttercream. Now you just want to do this fairly evenly, and I've got a round nozzle here, because this isn't necessarily about decorative techniques. This is about just spreading out the buttercream evenly. If I was to plop some of the buttercream on and then spread it out with a palette knife like I did with the jam, then what's going to happen is that the jam is going to mix in with the buttercream and you won't have those two distinct layers. So this is an effective way of applying your buttercream to a cake. Once you've done that, obviously you replace the top of your cake. You don't want to squish it down, you just want to sit it carefully on top of the buttercream and jam. And now I'm going to be demonstrating the decorative aspect of this cake. So I've changed my nozzle for a star-shaped nozzle, because obviously it adds a little bit more detail and texture to the buttercream as it's piped out. With all of these decorative techniques, it really is a case of practice makes perfect, so don't be disheartened if your cake doesn't turn out exactly how you imagined it. The more you practice with these skills, the better you will get at applying them to your cakes. There are some little tips when using a piping bag. My suggestion, especially when your bag is full, is to use your weaker hand to hold the nozzle end and your stronger hand to hold the top of it, so that you're holding it closed at the top. If you try and pipe one-handed, what can happen is that the icing will just burst out the top of the bag. So you twist the bag to close it once you've filled it with the butter icing, and then with your strong hand, so for me I'm right-handed, so I use my right hand to hold the top of the bag and then my left hand to guide it on the cake. And then don't forget what you've learned in the previous workbooks. You can add other decorative features. So here I am just adding blueberries as an additional garnish, which not only adds a bit more colour and interest to the cake, but also flavour. And just off screen here, I'm prepping a final garnish using a strawberry. So I'm fanning this strawberry, so I've sliced it whilst keeping it all intact at the top by the stem, so that it's an additional garnish to go in the middle of the cake. And because I had some butter icing left over in my piping bag that I didn't want to waste, I'm just using it to decorate a plain fairy cake. So I start from the outside and swell towards the middle of the cake, trying to keep an even coverage as possible. A bit like a famous brand of ice cream that you sometimes see in a van visiting your street. And then from there you can add additional garnish. It could be fruit, or I'm going to use sprinkles in this one. And you could just throw them on, well, I wouldn't throw them on, but maybe scatter them on, or you can place them carefully. So if you've bought sprinkles that are themed, like the ones I've got here, these are mermaid ones, then you can think about how you place them individually on your cupcake. If you wanted to be super accurate, you could even use tweezers that you've bought specifically for cake decorating, so that you aren't touching too much of the buttercream, and place them on that way. Now when you're piping a batch of cupcakes as well, one of the top tips I can give you for more professional presentation is to ensure uniformity. You might see me use this word a lot in your feedback, and that means just trying to make them all look exactly the same. And finally, I just want to show you how you can add colour to your butter icing. Now, if you think back to your water icing from workbook 1, you've seen how you can use food colouring or gel dyes to mix into the icing, and the same applies to butter icing. So you can scoop it into a bowl and mix it in with gel icing or food colour. But if you wanted to do it slightly differently, for example, you wanted to create different tones within your butter icing, then this is how you would do it. You set up your piping bag, and then this works especially well with gel because it's got such a strong colour. You can just squeeze some of the dye in stripes within your piping bag. Now again, if you're using gel, remember not to use it too heavily because it will come out so strong in colour and just look too dark. So just squeeze a stripe from the nozzle end up towards the top end, but you don't need to go all the way to the end because chances are you're not going to be filling it up that far with the butter icing. As you can see from my hands, it can be a messy job. So I've put a bit of purple in there, but I also want to add another colour. You could use a cocktail stick to get a more even spread of the colour. So I had quite a big droplet of gel down there, so I just wanted to spread that out a bit. And then I'm going to add some blue as well, just going to the opposite side of the piping bag and doing exactly the same again. Now you could do this with even more colours and more contrasting colours, and really experiment and just see what sorts of effects you can get. Something else you might want to consider as a way of presenting your cakes, as you can see in this shot here, I've got a cake board. So effectively you could make these yourself, so you could get a piece of rigid cardboard and cover it with tin foil as a way of presenting your cake or cupcakes onto. But you can buy these pre-bought like I have from a shop. I tend to reuse mine as well, so if you give them a good wipe over with a damp cloth after they've been used, so the cakes have all been eaten up, then you can use them again and again. Once you've got your colorants into the piping bag, you then just spoon in the butter ice in exactly the same way as you were previously shown, so you can still use a pint glass to help you, and then you're ready to start piping it. And as you can see, what happens is the buttercream takes the food colouring with it as you pipe it out, and you get these lovely different tonal effects. You should now have all the information you need to complete the next session of your workbook. Good luck!